Amara was the kind of girl who believed small acts could make a big difference. At just 17, she carried herself with quiet confidence and a heart full of empathy. Growing up in a modest apartment with her single mother and younger brother, she'd learned early on the value of hard work, respect, and compassion. Her mornings always started the same: up before sunrise, helping her little brother get dressed, packing their lunches, and making sure her mom had time for a quick coffee before rushing off to work. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Amara pulled on her worn hoodie and slung her backpack over one shoulder. The sky was still dark, and the street shimmered with puddles reflecting headlights. She hated being late, but the buses were often behind schedule when the weather turned. Still, she didn't complain. Life had taught her to be patient. When the bus finally arrived, it was already packed. Amara stepped inside, swiped her bus pass, and grabbed onto a metal pole as the vehicle jerked forward. People were hunched over their phones or lost in their thoughts, the windows fogged up from the dampness and body heat. The only sound was the soft hiss of the bus engine and the occasional beep of a stop request. As she scanned the rows, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to hold onto the rail near the middle of the bus. She wore a faded purple coat and clutched a floral-patterned handbag. Her gray curls framed a tired face that looked like it had seen 1,000 stories. No one had offered her a seat. Without a second thought, Amara stood up and gently tapped the woman on the shoulder. "Would you like to sit here?" she asked with a warm smile. The woman blinked in surprise, then smiled back, her eyes lighting up. "Thank you, dear. That's very kind of you." Amara stepped aside, holding onto the rail as the bus swayed. She didn't mind standing. What mattered was that someone who needed comfort more than she did now had it. To Amara, this wasn't a big deal. It was simply the right thing to do. But in that small moment, something powerful had already begun to unfold. As the bus continued to weave through the city streets, the elderly woman settled into the seat Amara had offered. She sat with a certain grace, her back straight, hands resting gently on her lap, and a faint scent of lavender lingering in the air around her. Her coat, though simple, was neatly pressed, and a delicate brooch sparkled near her collar. There was something about her, an elegance that didn't shout, but whispered of a life lived fully. Amara, still standing beside her, found herself glancing down occasionally, curious but polite. After a few minutes of silence, the woman looked up and spoke, her voice soft but sure. "Not many young people take the time to notice others these days. You're different." Amara smiled shyly. "My mom says we should treat people how we'd want to be treated. I guess it just stuck." The woman nodded, thoughtfully. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. And you, my dear, have a good heart. That's a rare gift." There was a pause, and then Amara asked, "What's your name?" "Eloise," she said, her smile deepening. "Mrs. Eloise Thompson. I'm Amara. Nice to meet you." What began as small talk soon grew into something more meaningful. The two of them, generations apart, found an unexpected connection. They spoke about everything from school to dreams, from the pressure of growing up to the fear of not becoming who you hope to be. Amara shared her love for writing and her hope of one day attending college, though she admitted money was always tight. She talked about her younger brother, how she helped take care of him, and how much she wanted to be a good role model. Mrs. Eloise listened closely, her eyes never straying from Amara's face. She didn't interrupt, but every now and then she would respond with a story of her own, a lesson tucked inside each one. She spoke of her younger days, of chasing dreams that seemed out of reach, and of people who had come and gone from her life like passing seasons. Her words were thoughtful, layered with meaning, and often just a little cryptic. "One act of kindness," she said at one point, can change the entire course of someone's life. But the real magic is that it changes yours too. Amara let that sit for a moment. It sounded simple, but it carried weight. She wasn't sure exactly what Mrs. Eloise meant, but she felt its truth settle somewhere deep inside her. By the time the bus neared its final downtown stop, the two had spoken as if they'd known each other far longer than a single ride allowed. There was a comfort between them, quiet and rare, and though they just met, Amara had the strange feeling that Mrs. Eloise had come into her life for a reason she didn't yet understand. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle as the bus rolled into the heart of downtown. The city outside the foggy windows buzzed with people clutching umbrellas, dodging puddles, and weaving through traffic. Inside the bus, Amara and Mrs. Eloise sat quietly now, the earlier conversation lingering between them, like the last note of a song. Amara had never expected to feel so at ease with a stranger, but something about Mrs. Eloise's calm presence had settled over her like a warm blanket. Just as the driver announced the next stop, Mrs. Eloise shifted in her seat and reached into her handbag. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. Amara watched, curious, as the older woman pulled out a small cream-colored envelope, sealed and slightly worn at the edges. She turned and held it out to Amara with both hands. "I want you to have this," she said gently. "Open it when you're ready. It's not just a thank you." Amara blinked, confused. "What is it?" Mrs. Eloise gave her a soft smile, the kind that held more than words ever could. "A seed," she replied, "and like all seeds, it won't make sense until it starts to grow." Before Amara could ask another question, the bus came to a stop with a hiss. Mrs. Eloise stood up with surprising grace and gathered her things. She gave Amara one last look, a look full of something Amara couldn't quite name. Then, without another word, she stepped off the bus and disappeared into the bustling crowd, her purple coat blending into the sea of umbrellas. Amara stood frozen for a moment, the envelope still warm in her hand. She looked out the window, searching for the older woman, but she was already gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation. She turned the envelope over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, not just physically but emotionally. There was something about the way it was given to her, the way Mrs. Eloise had spoken, that made it feel like more than just a note. But opening it right there, on the bus with strangers brushing past her, didn't feel right. It felt too personal. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Amara slipped the envelope into her backpack and sat down in the now empty seat. She stared out the window, heart pounding gently in her chest, wondering what could possibly be inside. She wasn't ready to open it yet, but she knew, deep down, that whatever it was, her life had already begun to change. That evening, after dinner, and helping her little brother with his homework, Amara sat alone at the small desk in her bedroom. The house was quiet, the soft hum of rain still tapping at the windows. The cream-colored envelope lay in front of her, like a mystery that had waited patiently all day to be unraveled. She had carried it with her, thinking about it constantly, wondering, imagining, hesitating. She took a deep breath and broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter written in delicate cursive on thick ivory paper. As she unfolded it, a second item slipped out and fluttered onto her desk. Amara's breath caught in her throat. It was a check. Her hands trembled as she picked it up and stared at the numbers. $50,000. She blinked, not trusting her eyes. She looked again. The amount hadn't changed. Her heart started pounding as she turned back to the letter and began to read. "Dear Amara, if you're reading this, then you waited just as I hoped you would. That patience tells me a great deal about who you are. Kindness is easy to perform, but rare when it is consistent. What you did for me today may have seemed small to you, but to someone who has lived as long as I have, I recognized it for what it truly was, a spark. You reminded me of myself when I was your age, full of hope, burdened with responsibility, and quietly pushing forward despite the weight of the world on your shoulders. I grew up with very little, just like you. When I was a young woman, trying to make it through school, a stranger once did something for me that changed my life. They believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. Because of that, I was able to build something: a business, a future, and a legacy. I spent decades growing my company, and when I finally retired, I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life: find others who reminded me of that young girl. People who gave without expecting anything in return. People like you. This check is not a reward, it's a recognition, an investment. I see promise in you, Amara, not just for your future, but for the future of everyone you will touch with your light. Use it however you need. For school, for your family, for your dreams. Just promise me one thing: when the time comes, and you see someone who needs a hand, pass something forward. It doesn't have to be money. Sometimes, the right word or a seat on a bus is more powerful than anything printed on a check. With all my heart, Eloise Thompson. Amara read the letter twice, then a third time, her eyes stinging with tears. She clutched the paper to her chest, overwhelmed by a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and a quiet sense of destiny. Somehow, this woman, this stranger, had seen her, truly seen her, in a way that very few ever had. She didn't know what her next steps would be, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, Amara's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. With the check from Mrs. Eloise deposited safely into a joint account with her mother, Amara wasted no time. The first thing she did was sit down with her mom at the kitchen table, papers spread out, and fill out every college application she had once put off because of the cost. Fees that once felt like towering walls now crumbled. The look of pride in her mother's eyes was worth more than the money itself. Next, Amara helped catch up on overdue bills. She watched her mom breathe easier for the first time in years. No more worrying about lights being shut off or skipping meals to make rent. But Amara didn't stop there. A long-held dream stirred inside her, one she had quietly nurtured for years. She had always wanted to create a safe space in her neighborhood, where kids could read, learn, and feel seen. Using a portion of the money, she partnered with the local library and a few small businesses to launch a weekend youth center. It started small: a few beanbags, donated books, a couple of computers, but it grew quickly. Kids came in droves, drawn by the warmth, the sense of belonging, and the bright smile of the girl who started it all. Word of Amara's story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had once passed each other silently on the street now stopped to talk, to share, to give. Neighbors began donating books, offering tutoring, volunteering hours at the center. What began as one woman's gift became a community's transformation. Then the local newspaper got wind of the story. One article led to another, and soon Amara was being contacted by news stations and school districts asking her to speak. She never tried to make it about herself. Every interview, every speech she gave, she talked about Mrs. Eloise and the power of kindness. She spoke with quiet strength about how the smallest good deed could become something life-changing. Inspired by Eloise's gesture, Amara created the Eloise Thompson Scholarship Fund, using part of the money and additional donations from the community. The scholarship wasn't just for high achievers, it was for students who showed compassion, integrity, and the will to give back. Students like Amara, she stood on stages in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands, sharing her story with young people who didn't think their actions mattered. She reminded them that they did. Her voice carried across classrooms, auditoriums, and living rooms across the country, not just as a story of luck, but as a story of love and legacy. The girl who had once stood on a crowded bus offering her seat was now standing tall in the world, carrying not just her dreams, but the dreams of everyone she was helping to lift. In the days that followed, Amara's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. With the check from Mrs. Eloise deposited safely into a joint account with her mother, Amara wasted no time.
The first thing she did was sit down with her mom at the kitchen table, papers spread out, and fill out every college application she had once put off because of the cost. Fees that once felt like towering walls now crumbled. The look of pride in her mother's eyes was worth more than the money itself. Next, Amara helped catch up on overdue bills. She watched her mom breathe easier for the first time in years. No more worrying about lights being shut off or skipping meals to make rent. But Amara didn't stop there. A long-held dream stirred inside her, one she had quietly nurtured for years. She had always wanted to create a safe space in her neighborhood, where kids could read, learn, and feel seen. Using a portion of the money, she partnered with the local library and a few small businesses to launch a weekend youth center. It started small, a few beanbags, donated books, a couple of computers, but it grew quickly. Kids came in droves, drawn by the warmth, the sense of belonging, and the bright smile of the girl who started it all. Word of Amara's story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had once passed each other silently on the street now stopped to talk, to share, to give. Neighbors began donating books, offering tutoring, volunteering hours at the center. What began as one woman's gift became a community's transformation. Then the local newspaper got wind of the story. One article led to another, and soon Amara was being contacted by news stations and school districts asking her to speak. She never tried to make it about herself. Every interview, every speech she gave, she talked about Mrs. Eloise and the power of kindness. She spoke with quiet strength about how the smallest good deed could become something life-changing. Inspired by Eloise's gesture, Amara created the Eloise Thompson Scholarship Fund, using part of the money and additional donations from the community. The scholarship wasn't just for high achievers, it was for students who showed compassion, integrity, and the will to give back. Students like Amara, she stood on stages in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands, sharing her story with young people who didn't think their actions mattered. She reminded them that they did. Her voice carried across classrooms, auditoriums, and living rooms across the country, not just as a story of luck, but as a story of love and legacy. The girl who had once stood on a crowded bus offering her seat was now standing tall in the world, carrying not just her dreams, but the dreams of everyone she was helping to lift. Years had passed, but Amara never forgot the bus ride that changed her life. Now in her late 20s, she stood tall as the founder and director of the Light Project, a non-profit organization dedicated to empowering youth through education, mentorship, and community service. Her work had taken her around the country, even across the world. But her heart always remained grounded in the values she learned that rainy morning long ago. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amara boarded a city bus after finishing a speaking engagement at a nearby school. She hadn't taken the bus in a while, but something about this particular day made her want to feel the pulse of everyday life again. The chatter, the movement, the ordinary magic of people going about their day. She found a seat near the back and settled in, the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the city outside washing over her like a familiar song. A few stops later, a heavily pregnant woman stepped on board, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The bus was nearly full, and she glanced around for a place to sit. Before anyone else could move, a young boy, no more than 12 or 13, stood up and offered her his seat. He looked a little unsure, his backpack slipping off one shoulder, but he smiled politely as she thanked him and sat down. Amara watched quietly, her chest tightening with a feeling that was part nostalgia, part pride. The boy reminded her of herself, not in appearance, but in spirit. The quiet gesture, the instinct to help without hesitation. It was all too familiar. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, nearly identical to the one she had once received. She had carried them for years now, always prepared for a moment like this. Each one held a different message, sometimes a small gift, sometimes a scholarship invitation, but they all carried the same intention: to recognize kindness and keep it alive. Amara stood and walked to the boy, who was now holding onto a nearby pole. As the bus rolled on, she tapped his shoulder gently. He turned, eyes wide and curious. "You did something kind," she said with a warm smile. "Take this. Open it when you're ready." She handed him the envelope, her fingers brushing his for just a second. He looked at her, confused but intrigued, and nodded. As Amara returned to her seat, she glanced out the window, the city blurring past. She didn't need to see what he did next. She already knew. The circle had continued, just as it was meant to, and somewhere, she imagined Mrs. Eloise smiling too.